The crisp night air clung to Emily Carter's skin as she jogged down the winding trail by Lake Hollow. Her breath formed in pale clouds, dispersing into the blackness, the rhythm of her sneakers slapping the pavement syncing perfectly with the playlist pounding in her earbuds. It was late, later than she usually ran, but Emily liked it this way. No noisy dog walkers. No strollers taking up the path. Just her, the lake, and the measured thump of her heartbeat. She always said this was the only time her mind felt uncluttered. But tonight something was different. Her eyes flicked toward the waterline. The moon cast a fractured silver path across the rippling surface, but the trees along the far shore looked like black teeth against the horizon. She'd always thought of this trail as safe, a kind of personal sanctuary. Until she heard it. A faint scuff of gravel. Emily slowed, one earbud half out. The sound stopped. She glanced over her shoulder. The trail stretched empty in both directions. Lampposts humming, shadows pooling between them. No joggers. No late-night dog walkers. Nothing. She chuckled under her breath, shaking her head, and started jogging again, telling herself it was just the wind or a squirrel darting across the path. But then she heard it again, closer this time. A deliberate footstep, not the random snap of a twig. Her pulse sped up. She resisted the urge to turn around immediately, keeping her stride steady. The security tip from her self-defense class echoed in her head. Don't let them know you've noticed. She rounded a bend, the trees thickening overhead. The street lamps thinned out here, leaving stretches of pure darkness between pools of light. That was when she saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of her vision. A shadow, long and thin, slipping out of one lamplight pool into the next. She spun around. Nothing. The wind rattled dry leaves in the gutter. Her hand tightened on the zipper of her jacket as she pulled it higher around her throat. She scolded herself for letting her imagination run wild, but her legs quickened anyway. By the time she reached her apartment building, her pulse was pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with cardio. The lobby was quiet, eerily so. She slid her key into the lock, shut the door, and leaned against it for a moment, listening to the silence. It was probably nothing. Just her mind playing tricks on her. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling. Emily didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the building seemed louder than usual. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen became a low, constant growl. And twice she could have sworn she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door, slow, deliberate, pausing between steps like someone listening for movement. By morning she convinced herself she was overreacting. She had a full day ahead and letting paranoia creep in would only make things worse. She brewed her coffee, scrolled through her phone, and forced a smile when she saw Jenna Morales' text. Jenna, still doing the night runs? Girl, you're braver than me. Emily typed back quickly, helps me think. Besides, nothing ever happens here. She didn't mention the shadow. Or the footsteps. That evening the air was thicker, carrying the damp smell of rain-soaked concrete. She jogged later than usual again, habit, stubbornness, maybe even defiance. The trail was slick, moonlight splintering across puddles. As she neared the lake's narrow footbridge, her music paused for a brief buffering glitch. That's when she heard it again. Footsteps. Not behind her this time. Beside her. She turned sharply, too sharply, and her foot skidded on the wet boards. She caught herself on the railing, eyes scanning the shadowed path to her left. And there it was. A shape half hidden by the tree line. Tall. The beam from the nearest lamp post didn't quite reach it, but she could see enough. The faint outline of a hood pulled low, hands in pockets. Hey. Emily's voice cracked. The figure didn't move. Adrenaline surged. She forced herself into motion, running hard toward the main road. When she glanced back, the space between the trees was empty. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She yanked it out, expecting Jenna again, but instead found an unknown number. Unknown, nice pace tonight. Her stomach dropped. Emily didn't go home right away. She detoured into a late-night cafe, hands trembling as she stirred a cup of tea she didn't even drink. From the corner of her eye, she watched the reflections in the window, waiting for that hooded shape to appear again. It never did. When she finally returned to her apartment, the hallway light outside her door was out. Burned out. She slid the key into the lock, stepped inside, and froze. The faintest smell of cologne hung in the air. Not hers. Not anyone she knew. Emily didn't move at first. She just stood in the center of her apartment, every muscle in her body locked. The scent was faint, but it was there, something sharp and clean with a chemical edge beneath it like aftershave mixed with disinfectant. She had never smelled it here before. Her eyes darted to the coffee table. She knew she'd left the remote dead center. Now it was tilted diagonally. The throw blanket she'd tossed on the arm of the couch was folded neatly, something she never did. Emily's mouth went dry. Slowly she backed toward her bedroom. She didn't plan to go inside, but from the doorway she could see it. Her dresser drawer opened by an inch. And then she saw something that made her legs nearly buckle. One of her sneakers, the reflective pair she wore on her runs, was sitting on the bedspread. Just one. Her throat tightened, and without thinking she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. By the time 2 uniformed officers arrived, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the lock to let them in. One of them, Officer Ramirez, was young and polite but clearly skeptical. "You're sure you didn't just forget you left it there?" he asked, pointing to the sneaker. Emily's voice was firmer than she felt. "I know my own habits. Someone's been in here." The older officer, Detective Ross Mitchell, called in from a nearby precinct because of a string of recent stalking reports, studied her with that steady, assessing gaze that made her feel both safer and more exposed. "Miss Carter, you said you smelled cologne when you came in?" Mitchell's tone was calm, deliberate. "Yes. And things were moved. Not stolen, just moved." He glanced at the sneaker again, then at the dark hallway beyond her door. "That's not the kind of thing we ignore." The younger officer took a quick sweep of the apartment but found no signs of forced entry. Still, Mitchell made a note to request building security footage. Before leaving, he handed her his card. "If anything else happens, anything, you call me. Don't wait." Emily nodded, clutching the card like it was a lifeline. But when the officers were gone, and the apartment door was locked again, the weight of the silence pressed down on her. She picked up the lone sneaker, staring at it like it might answer her questions. That's when she noticed something tucked into the laces, a folded piece of paper, small enough to miss if you weren't looking. Her stomach turned as she opened it. Nice shoes. Shame if something happened to them. Emily's fingers trembled around the note. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, almost aggressive, each letter pressed so deep into the paper she could feel the grooves against her fingertips. Her first instinct was to throw it away, pretend it wasn't real. But something about the weight of the words made her pause. This wasn't random. Whoever wrote it knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted her scared. And it was working. She slid the note into a sandwich bag, exactly like she'd seen in crime shows, and shoved it into a drawer. Her mind was racing. Had they been in her bedroom? Had they been here while she was asleep? Sleep. The very idea felt impossible now. That night, she pushed her dresser in front of the door. She left every light on. Her phone stayed in her hand, unlocked, as if she might need to call for help at any second. By morning, she had a pounding headache from lack of rest. But the worst part wasn't the exhaustion. It was the feeling that someone had been here again while she dozed. The smell of that same cologne lingered in the air. Emily called Mitchell. She didn't care if it made her sound paranoid. "I need you to see something," she said. "And I need you to smell something." Within the hour, Mitchell was standing in her living room, his sharp eyes scanning the space. He took the note from its plastic bag, his jaw tightening as he read it. "This isn't nothing," he said. "This is targeted. Can you dust it for prints?" "I will," he replied, slipping it into an evidence envelope. "But don't expect miracles. People like this, they're usually careful." He moved through the apartment, pausing by the bedroom doorway. "You said the smell was here last night?" Emily nodded. "And this morning." Mitchell inhaled deeply, then frowned. "Cheap cologne. Overapplied. Almost like they want you to notice it." "That's exactly it," Emily said, shivering. Before leaving, he turned to her, his expression grave. "Emily, I think you should stay somewhere else for a while." She shook her head. "I can't just leave my place. And if they know where I live, what's stopping them from finding me anywhere else?" Mitchell didn't argue, but she could tell he didn't like her answer. That night, she double-locked the door. She wedged a chair under the knob. She even downloaded a motion detection camera app and propped her phone up on the bookshelf. Hours later, she woke to a faint click. The sound of her door unlocking. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling. But before she could even stand, the door eased open an inch. And there, in the sliver of darkness between the frame and the hall, a pale eye stared in at her. Emily froze. That single pale eye was like a pinprick of ice straight through her chest. She didn't scream. Didn't move. The primal part of her brain told her that if she stayed completely still, maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't come in. But the door eased open another inch. Emily's phone was still recording, balanced on the bookshelf. She reached for it slowly, her hand shaking so hard she almost dropped it. A shadow slipped into the apartment, long, hunched, deliberate. The cologne hit her instantly, cloying and heavy. She could hear the faint squeak of his shoes against the laminate floor. The intruder didn't speak. He didn't look around like a thief. He looked directly at her. Emily's fingers found the side button on her phone and pressed it. The sound of the fake shutter click echoed in the silence. His head snapped toward the bookshelf, eyes glinting in the dim light. And then he bolted. The door slammed so hard it rattled the frame. Emily sat there for a full minute, her lungs refusing to work, before she lunged for her phone. She replayed the footage with a trembling thumb. The video wasn't perfect. The lighting was bad, the figure partly in shadow, but there was enough. The sharp cheekbones. The messy dark hair. Those piercing blue-gray eyes. Mark Turner. She knew the name before she even said it aloud. Mitchell had mentioned him once in passing. A man with a history of harassment complaints but no convictions. Someone who knew how to slip through cracks in the system. Emily called Mitchell immediately. Within the hour, they were watching the footage together in her kitchen. Mitchell's jaw tightened as he hit pause on the frame where Mark's face was clearest. "That's enough to bring him in," he said. "But Emily, this isn't over. He's going to push back." The arrest happened just before dawn. Emily barely slept. She'd been pacing the apartment in leggings and an oversized sweater, clutching a mug of coffee she never drank. When Mitchell called, his voice was clipped but charged with purpose. "We've got him. Stay inside until I call you again." From her balcony, Emily watched two unmarked cars roll to a stop down the block. Plainclothes officers emerged, moving fast. Mark Turner didn't resist. That was almost worse. He walked out of his apartment with his hands in his pockets, smirking like he'd been expecting them. As they cuffed him, he looked straight up toward her balcony. Emily stepped back so fast she nearly tripped. That smirk burned into her mind. Hours later, Mitchell arrived with an update. "They're booking him now. We've got your footage plus the lobby camera from your building." "But..." Emily didn't like the pause. "But what?" Mitchell sighed. "He's already got a lawyer, and not the cheap kind. He's claiming you've been harassing him. Says you fabricated the footage and that you've been obsessed with him for months." Emily laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "That's insane." "Insane doesn't matter if it muddies the case," Mitchell said. "And he's already filed for a restraining order. Against you." The counterattack was fast and brutal. By evening, Emily's phone was full of missed calls from friends, colleagues, even her mother, all asking why her name was suddenly showing up in headlines. Local woman accused in stalking dispute with former neighbor. Mark had flipped the story. And the worst part? He had something. Text messages Emily didn't remember sending, screenshots of supposed emails. Mitchell thought they were fakes, but they looked convincing. Too convincing. It wasn't just about proving Mark was dangerous anymore. It was about surviving the slow bleed of her reputation, her safety, and her sanity. That night, as she sat in her darkened living room, Emily's phone buzzed with a single new message from an unknown number. "You're not the victim, Emily. You're the game." Emily stared at the message for a long time, her fingers trembling over the phone screen. She could feel her pulse in her ears, the throb of adrenaline so loud it made the silence in her apartment deafening. She thought about calling Mitchell. About handing it over and letting the system handle it. But the system had already let Mark twist the narrative. The system had already let him walk close enough to smell her shampoo on that trail. So Emily made a decision. If Mark wanted to make this a game, she'd play, but on her terms. She went back to Lake Hollow Trail the next evening, earlier than usual. The sun had just dipped below the treeline, painting the sky in streaks of bruised purple and gold. She dressed the same way she had the first time she'd noticed the shadow. The same charcoal gray running jacket, pastel tank, black leggings, reflective sneakers. But this time she wore a small body camera under the jacket. A gift from Jenna, who still thought Emily was insane for doing this but also knew she wouldn't back down. Mitchell didn't approve. He'd said as much when she floated the idea earlier. "Emily, you're putting yourself in the open. You don't even know if he'll take the bait." She'd smiled without humor. "Oh, he'll take it." The trail was almost empty, just a couple of cyclists heading the other way and a man walking a German shepherd in the distance. The lake rippled under a faint breeze, the water catching the last light like shards of glass. Emily jogged at a steady pace, her senses tuned to every rustle of leaves, every crunch of gravel behind her. The body cam fed live footage to Mitchell, who was parked in an unmarked car near the trail entrance with two other officers. 10 minutes in, she felt it, the unmistakable prickling at the back of her neck. The rhythm of her footsteps quickened. So did the ones behind her. Her breathing grew sharper, not entirely from exertion. She made a show of glancing over her shoulder, pretending to spot nothing, then subtly slowed her pace. The shadow stayed with her. Another 100 yards and the path narrowed, the trees leaning closer. This was the spot she'd picked. No streetlights, no clear escape to the main road. She stopped, bent over like she was catching her breath. The crunch of footsteps behind her came closer. Closer. When she straightened, Mark Turner was standing 5 feet away, his hood up, eyes glinting in the fading light. "Evening, Emily," he said, his voice casual, almost amused. The mic in her jacket picked up every word. "You shouldn't be here," she said, forcing steel into her voice. Mark smiled, slow and deliberate. "Neither should you. But here we are." From somewhere deep in the trees, Mitchell's voice crackled faintly over the earpiece. "Hold him there. We're moving in." But before she could answer, Mark stepped forward, closing the space between them. His hand twitched toward his pocket, and then a sharp snap of twigs erupted from the brush to Emily's left. She turned her head instinctively. By the time she looked back, Mark was gone. Emily's mind reeled. 1 second, Mark was there, his breath visible in the cold air. The next, nothing. No footfalls pounding away, no rustle of leaves. Just the lake's gentle lap against the shore and the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. "Mitchell, he's gone," she whispered into the mic, eyes darting between the shadows. "Stay where you are." Mitchell's voice snapped back, sharp with urgency. "We've got units closing in on your position." Emily pivoted in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. Her instincts screamed that he hadn't simply run, he was still out there watching. She could feel it in her bones, the way the air seemed to tighten around her. Then came the sound. A faint plink on the trail behind her, like a pebble dropped onto gravel. She spun. Nothing. The officers arrived less than a minute later, their flashlights slicing through the gloom, beams catching the mist that had begun to crawl in from the lake. "Which way?" Mitchell demanded, scanning the path. Emily pointed to where Mark had stood. "There." "But he didn't run. He just..." She stopped, realizing how insane it sounded. Mitchell signaled to one of the officers, who began sweeping the area with a K9 unit. The dog caught a scent, pulling hard toward the lakeshore, but after 50 yards the trail went cold, as if Mark had evaporated into the night. They combed the area for hours, even checked a few nearby maintenance shacks. Nothing. No footprints. No discarded clothing. No sign he'd ever been there, except for the fact that Emily had seen him, and Mitchell had heard him. When they finally escorted her back to her apartment, Emily couldn't shake the feeling she was walking into a trap. Her hands shook as she locked the door behind her, the echo of Mark's smile burned into her mind. 2 nights later she got another message. "You're playing the wrong game, Emily." No number. No caller ID. Just the words, glowing against the dark screen. Mitchell insisted they move her to a safe house until they figured out how Mark was slipping through their net. But Emily resisted. Something in her gut told her that hiding would only make him bolder. So she made a decision. If Mark could vanish, she'd have to make herself impossible to lose track of, but also impossible to reach without leaving him exposed. The only way to end it was to draw him out again. But this time she wouldn't be alone on the trail. The plan was simple in theory, reckless in practice. Emily would run her usual route by Lake Hollow just like before, but with an entire covert team in place. Mitchell wasn't thrilled. "You're basically dangling yourself in front of a predator, Emily," he said, leaning over the map of the trail system. "That's exactly the point," she replied. "He's counting on fear keeping me unpredictable. I want him to know I'm still here, still moving the same way. It's the only way he takes the bait." Mitchell studied her for a long moment. "You understand what happens if something goes wrong?" She nodded. "Then I hope you're faster than he is." The night of the operation, the air was so still it felt wrong. No wind, no rustle of leaves, just the faint hum of distant traffic. Emily pulled on her charcoal gray jacket, tied her hair back, and laced her reflective sneakers tight. Mitchell's team fanned out, each officer in plain clothes, hidden at key choke points along the trail. 2 sat in parked cars with line of sight on the parking lot. A K9 unit waited in the shadows. She set off at 10:47 p.m., her breath visible in the cold. The lake's surface shimmered under the half-moon, and every step echoed a little too loud. 3 minutes in she felt it. That familiar prickle between her shoulder blades. Her eyes flicked to the right, nothing. To the left, only the skeletal outlines of trees. Then, in the reflection of the lake, she saw it. A tall shadow, keeping pace behind her, just far enough to stay hidden. She slowed near the bend where the trail narrowed, a spot Mitchell had called the funnel. The shadow hesitated. Then it moved closer. Her pulse surged. She forced herself not to break into a sprint. That's when the radio in Mitchell's ear crackled. "We've got movement. North quadrant." Moving toward Emily's position. Mitchell started running. Emily rounded the bend and Mark was there. Not lurking in the dark this time, but standing squarely in the middle of the path. "Evening, Emily," he said softly. "Nice night for a run." Before she could answer, Mitchell emerged from the shadows, weapon drawn. "Mark Turner. Don't move." Mark's smile didn't falter. He lifted his hands, but his eyes never left Emily's. "You finally brought company. Took you long enough." 2 more officers closed in from behind. It should have been over. But Mark's next move was pure chaos. He bolted, not away but toward the lake, diving straight into the freezing water. Floodlights cut across the surface as officers scrambled to the shore. The K-9 unit barked wildly. Mitchell cursed. "We've got to cut him off before he reaches the far bank." The last thing Emily saw before the fog swallowed him was Mark's head breaking the surface, and that same cold, unsettling smile. The lake looked deceptively calm, but its winter-chilled waters were a killer in their own right. Mark's strokes were sharp and fast, cutting through the silvered surface like a predator. "Boat team. Now." Mitchell barked into his radio. 2 officers sprinted toward the small patrol skiff moored nearby. Emily stood at the shoreline, chest heaving, every instinct screaming to run after him, even though the water could take her down in minutes. Floodlights swung wildly, chasing the ripple trails Mark left behind. The K-9 handler tried to angle toward the other bank, already predicting where he might come out. Mitchell's voice was clipped. "He's going for the east inlet. It's shallow enough to stand, he'll vanish into the reeds." The boat roared to life, its motor slicing the silence. Spray glittered in the beam of the lights as it surged forward. Emily's eyes locked on a pale shape breaking the surface. Mark's head, hair slicked back, that same maddening smirk still in place. She couldn't tell if he was taunting them or just enjoying the chase. Halfway across he stopped swimming. Just floated there. "What the hell is he doing?" one of the boat officers muttered. Mitchell answered grimly, "He's waiting." From the shadow of the far bank, a second figure appeared. It was impossible to see details at this distance, but Emily caught enough: broad shoulders, dark clothing, and the unmistakable glint of something metallic in their hand. The realization slammed into her. Mark wasn't working alone. "Contact. East inlet, possible accomplice," the radio screamed. But before the officers could close in, Mark dove under. Seconds stretched into eternity. The boat crew swept their spotlights across the water, but only saw ripples, then nothing. Mitchell's voice was tight. "Keep searching. He can't hold his breath forever." Emily didn't answer. She was staring at the reeds, where the second shadow had already vanished. 3 minutes later, the boat returned to shore empty-handed. No sign of Mark. No splash to indicate where he'd emerged. Just the dark, still water, and the knowledge that he was somewhere out there, watching. Mitchell turned to Emily. "We'll get him. But you need to understand, this just got bigger. Much bigger." She didn't look away from the lake. "I know," she said. "And I'm not stopping until it's over." By morning, Lake Hollow looked harmless again. Sunlight glittered across the ripples, joggers circled the trail, and families fed ducks along the shore. But for Emily, the water was a wound that hadn't closed. She sat in the precinct's conference room, hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup she hadn't touched. Detective Ross Mitchell stood at the whiteboard, pinning up photos: Mark Turner at various ages, crime scene shots from the alley, and grainy stills from traffic cameras. "2 things we now know," Mitchell began. 1. Turner didn't just stumble onto you. This was planned. 2. He's not acting alone. He clicked a remote, bringing up a photo of the second figure from the reeds. Even zoomed and enhanced, it was blurry, a silhouette more than a face. "Whoever this is," Mitchell said, "they're trained? The way they moved? No wasted motion. This isn't some random friend helping him out." Emily leaned forward. "So, what, we're talking about a gang?" Mitchell shook his head. "Not exactly. We've been digging into Turner's digital trail. Look at this." The next slide was a screenshot of an online forum, dark interface, usernames hidden behind strings of numbers. Threads discussed disappearances, clean work, and contracts fulfilled. Emily's stomach tightened. "Contracts?" Mitchell nodded. "Paid disappearances. Not always murders, but let's just say they don't all end with the target breathing." Another detective entered, dropping a thick file on the table. Bank records from the last 3 months. Multiple small deposits into Turner's account, all from shell companies tied to offshore holdings. Every one of those companies connects to this. He slapped a photo onto the table, a black business card with nothing but an embossed silver logo, a circle with 3 jagged lines through it. Emily reached for it. "What is this?" Mitchell's jaw tightened. "It's called the Hollow Circuit. Been on our radar for years. No fixed base, no official members list, but every time it pops up, people vanish. And Turner? He's one of their freelancers." The realization landed heavy. This wasn't just about her anymore. "So I was at a job?" Emily asked quietly. "Probably," Mitchell said. "But the bigger question is, why you?" The Hollow Circuit doesn't waste time on small targets. Emily thought back. The months before the shadow, the subtle moments she'd ignored. The strange man in the grocery store aisle. The envelope in her mailbox with no return address. The job offer she'd turned down from a tech startup she'd never heard of. It all seemed disconnected. Until now. Mitchell's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then looked sharply at Emily. "They found something," he said. "You need to see this." The something turned out to be a flash drive, slid under the precinct's front door overnight in a plain manila envelope. No note. No fingerprints. Mitchell led Emily and 2 other detectives into the digital forensics lab. The blinds were drawn, the only light coming from the glow of multiple monitors. A tech analyst, Dana, was already seated at the main terminal. "This was encrypted," Dana said, "but whoever sent it wanted us to open it. The password was your name, Emily." Emily's throat went dry. The video loaded. At first just static. Then a flicker, a dimly lit room. A man sat with his back to the camera. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but something about the stillness felt staged. A voice, distorted and low, spoke over the hum of static. "Emily Carter. You've been running. You've been looking over your shoulder. And you were right to. But this isn't about your fear. It's about your choices." The man leaned forward into the light. It wasn't Mark Turner. This man was older, mid-40s, thin face, sunken eyes, a jagged scar running from his left ear to his jawline. "You refused the offer," he said. "That was your first mistake. You asked questions. That was your second. And now..." The screen cut to black for 3 full seconds. When the image returned, it showed Emily's apartment door. Not from security footage, from inside her hallway. "Now we have to finish what we started." The video ended. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the computers. Mitchell finally broke it. "They were inside your building." Emily gripped the edge of the desk. "How? I have deadbolts, cameras." "They're pros," Mitchell said grimly. "Your cameras? Probably looped. Your locks. Easy for them. The fact they sent this means they want you rattled." And they succeeded. Dana clicked open another file from the drive. It was a single image, a still frame from what looked like a wooded area at night. In the center of the photo was a crudely built wooden cross. Hanging from it was a running shoe, Emily's brand, her size. "They're telling us where to go," Mitchell said. "And they want us to bring you." Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "And if I don't go?" Mitchell's eyes didn't leave the screen. "Then they'll come to you." The plan was dangerous. Not just risky, borderline reckless. But Emily Carter knew they had run out of options. 4 weeks now, the footsteps had followed her. The shadow had lurked at the edge of her vision. The truth, once denied and doubted, was now an undeniable presence that had seeped into every part of her life. Detective Ross Mitchell wasn't happy about it. He stood at the corner of her small kitchen, arms crossed, his suit jacket draped over a chair, tie loosened. The weariness in his eyes wasn't from lack of sleep alone, it was the weight of responsibility. "You're not bait," he said flatly. "I'm already bait," Emily replied, voice steady. "This just makes it official." Ross's jaw flexed, his gaze locked on hers, searching for any hint of hesitation. There was none. Mark Turner's name hadn't been spoken in days, but his shadow hung between them. The man had vanished after his last encounter with Ross, slipping into whatever darkness had been hiding him all these years. They still had no hard evidence, just fear, suspicion, and a string of close calls. The plan was simple on paper. Emily would go for her usual night run. Only this time she'd take a route they knew had limited exits, and Ross, along with a discreet backup team, would be stationed at key choke points. Cameras would be hidden along the trail. But as the hour approached, Emily felt her chest tighten. This wasn't like the other runs. This time she wouldn't be alone. This time the hunter knew she was waiting. The November air was colder than she'd expected. A thin frost glittered at the edges of the sidewalk, and the lake to her left reflected only darkness. The moon was a thin crescent, offering no comfort. Her earbuds were silent. No playlist tonight, she needed to hear everything. Each footfall echoed in her head, every crunch of gravel magnified. At first, there was nothing but the rhythm of her breath and the distant lap of water. Then it came. A faint scuff. Behind her. Just far enough away to make her question it. She didn't look back. Her pace quickened, subtle, deliberate. Her heart pounded, not from exertion but from anticipation. The scuff came again. Louder. Closer. Ross's voice was in her ear via the tiny mic clipped to her jacket. "Steady, Emily. We've got eyes on you." But even his presence in her ear couldn't shake the primal instinct surging through her veins. Run. As Emily reached the bend by the old boathouse, the backup lights clicked on. Ross emerged from the shadows, signaling the team to close in. But in that split second, before anyone could react, something blurred in the corner of her vision. A tall figure in dark clothing broke from the tree-line, darting away from her, not toward her. Ross swore under his breath. "Go. He's moving east." Emily froze, torn between relief and dread. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She watched as two officers sprinted after the fleeing shadow, their shouts echoing through the trees. And then, another movement directly behind her. A second figure. This one closer. This one, smiling. Her breath caught. The man's pale skin, sharp cheekbones, and piercing blue-gray eyes cut through the dark like a knife. Mark Turner. "You run well, Emily," he said softly, stepping closer. "But you're not hard to find." Emily's feet felt welded to the ground. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her body refused to obey. Mark Turner's smirk widened, but it wasn't the expression of someone amused, it was the grin of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. The faint light from the boathouse caught the damp sheen of his weathered black jacket. His hood was down now, the messy dark brown hair visible, his eyes locked on hers with unsettling calm. "You've been busy," he murmured, voice low but carrying. "Talking to the wrong people. Asking the wrong questions." Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. "And you've been hiding. Running from what you did." For the briefest flicker, his expression hardened. But then it returned, that cold, calculated calm. "What I did." He tilted his head, stepping closer. "You think you know me, Emily? You don't. But I know you. I know when you leave your apartment. I know when you take your little runs by the lake. I even know the way you double lock your door before bed." Ross's voice crackled urgently in her ear. "Emily, stay where you are. I'm coming in." But Mark's gaze darted briefly to her jacket, to the subtle bulge of the mic clip. He smiled again. "He's listening, isn't he? Always watching. Always late." With sudden speed, Mark closed the distance, his hand clamping around her wrist. It wasn't a crushing grip, but it was firm enough to send panic flooding through her. In the same instant, Ross's shout erupted behind them, his footsteps pounding hard against the frozen ground. Mark leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "You're not the first he's failed to save." Then, as if scripted, chaos broke. Ross lunged, Mark shoved Emily aside, and both men crashed into the gravel, fists swinging, the sharp grunt of impact echoing in the night. Ross recovered fast. His years in the force showed in the precision of his movements. Every shove, every block measured, controlled. But Mark fought like someone who had nothing left to lose. Gravel sprayed under their boots as they wrestled, the lake's black water just a few feet away, lapping at the shore in rhythmic slaps. Emily scrambled back, her breath ragged, pulse pounding in her ears. "Ross!" she yelled, fumbling for the flashlight in her pocket. She clicked it on, flooding the scene in harsh white light. Mark squinted against it, momentarily thrown off, and that was all Ross needed. With a swift, decisive motion, Ross pinned Mark face down, one knee pressing between his shoulder blades. He wrenched Mark's arms behind his back and snapped the cuffs on with a metallic click that seemed to echo across the empty shoreline. Mark let out a low, bitter laugh. "You think this ends here?" he hissed. "You don't even know who you're really dealing with." Ross didn't answer. His face was a mask of composure, but Emily could see the fire in his eyes, a mixture of relief and restrained fury. The distant wail of sirens began to swell, red and blue lights flashing through the bare trees. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of the cold night air biting into her skin. Two uniformed officers jogged down the path, taking custody of Mark without a word. They loaded him into the back of a waiting cruiser, the door shutting with a heavy, final thud. Ross turned to Emily, scanning her up and down. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I'm fine. Just glad it's over." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't over. "Not really." Mark's parting words lingered in her mind, twisting like a hook she couldn't pull free. The morning after Mark's arrest, Lake Hollow looked different. The fog still rolled lazily off the water, the bare branches still reached like skeletal fingers into the gray sky, but something in the air had shifted. Emily sat in the corner booth of a small diner just outside town. Her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee she hadn't touched. The place smelled of burnt toast and overbrewed drip, and the hum of quiet conversation barely masked the weight pressing in on her chest. Ross slid into the seat across from her. He'd been up all night, running through interviews, evidence logs, and calls from the DA's office. His tie was loosened, his eyes rimmed in red, but his presence felt steady. "Mark's being processed," Ross said, his voice low. "Charges are strong: breaking and entering, stalking, assault. With his priors, he won't see daylight for a long time." Emily stared at the dark liquid in her cup, watching tiny ripples form when her fingers trembled. "He said, we didn't know who we were really dealing with." "What did he mean?" Ross hesitated, then leaned in. "We're still digging. His phone's encrypted, but we pulled enough to see he wasn't acting alone. There's a network. Other women. Other towns. You weren't his first, Emily. And he wasn't planning to stop." The words sank into her like stones in deep water. She thought of every step on that trail, every shadow that seemed to move just a beat too late. "If I hadn't," she stopped, shaking her head. "If I'd ignored it." "You didn't," Ross cut in. "You listened to your instincts. That's what saved you." Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, coating the sidewalks in a thin veil of white. Emily watched a couple walk past the window, their heads bent close, sharing quiet laughter. It was strange how life for others moved on, untouched, while hers still hummed with the echoes of footsteps in the dark. Life lesson learned. Trusting your instincts can mean the difference between safety and tragedy. Fear isn't always weakness. Sometimes, it's your mind's way of telling you the truth your eyes can't yet see. This story gripped you? Share it. Start a conversation in the comments. Have you ever felt watched, followed, or in danger only to second-guess yourself? Your experience might help someone else listen to that small, urgent voice inside them.